Here is every Easter egg that we found in Iron Man. The music in the casino scene. That's because this is the original theme song to the 1960s Iron Man cartoon.
He's a cool exec with a heart of steel.
Now, the movie's score was actually composed by Ramin Djawadi, who also wrote the theme to Game of Thrones. And for that show, he kind of repurposed the melody from this movie. Actually, the movie's score was originally composed on an electric guitar. This is because of the Black Sabbath song Iron Man and Tony's love for AC/DC.
Oh, I love Led Zeppelin!
Now, the woman that Tony is embedded with is Christine Everhart, who also appeared as an anchor on the fictional WHIH News, which played on Marvel's Twitter account leading up to Captain America: Civil War. Tony can't quite get her name right.
Christine.
That's right.
Which is a reference to the 2 Stephen King novels of the same name. Everhart is an actual character from the Iron Man comics who worked at the Daily Bugle, which also employs Peter Parker and Radio Raheem. Tony's AI is named Jarvis. The name was inspired by his butler from the comics, who then became the Avengers butler, cleaning up after them like so much Alfred. He named the AI after his childhood butler Jarvis, who appeared in Agent Carter and Avengers Endgame. Now, I've always thought that Jarvis must have had a hand in raising Tony, since later he says that his father was cold and distant.
He never told me he loved me, he never even told me he liked me.
And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon.
But there's another cool AI Easter egg in this film. In the awards show montage, this magazine article reads, Stark, going off a radically simple theorem that artificial intelligence can be imbibed with personality through alternative programming, is currently putting the finishing touches on 2 robotic prototypes that he believes will listen to him and learn from his behaviors. Now, one of these was obviously Jarvis.
Started out, Jarvis was just a natural language UI.
And the second was Dummy, right? No, the other AI with personality could have been a precursor to Ultron, because Ultron mimicked Tony's wisecracking personality.
I've come to save the world. But also, yeah.
Of course, in Age of Ultron, we also saw that Tony was developing several AI like Friday, so it could have been one of them. Also in the montage, we see Tony building computers with a young Bill Gates, and this issue of Popular Mechanics has a feature about the arc reactor, showing that for years, Howard was trying to perfect this machine. Now, this was all later addressed in Iron Man 2, when Howard admits he couldn't solve the missing element of the arc reactor and he needed his son's help.
One day you'll figure it out.
Even though his son was like a baby at the time. You can also see Tony drawing out a chalk diagram for Dummy, the robot that will save his life. The song and music video in this scene,
And I'm putting on my uniform, you know what I recognize?
is Slept on Tony, which is an original made for the soundtrack by Ghostface Killah. Ghostface's first album was called Iron Man, and he was supposed to cameo in this movie, but the scene was cut. But his fellow Wu-Tang member, Method Man, did appear in the MCU in Luke Cage. Tony is kidnapped by a terrorist group called the Ten Rings. Now, this was a reference to the Mandarin, arch-enemy of Iron Man in the comics, who has 10 magic rings. Jon Favreau considered using the Mandarin as the main villain, but decided to save him for the sequel. But instead, he spent Iron Man 3 in a coma, and the Mandarin became this.
I wouldn't go in there for 20 minutes.
And since that version pissed off fans, they're actually reintroducing the Mandarin in Shang-Chi, Legend of the Ten Rings. Another Iron Man villain, Fin Fang Foom, pops up on this billboard. Now, this art is from the miniseries Iron Man Viva Las Vegas, which was written by Iron Man director Jon Favreau. And there are a couple other nods to Iron Man villains. The pilot's call sign,
Whiplash 2,
is the name of the villain who appeared in Iron Man 2. The evil Roxxon Corporation's logo appears a few times in the movie. In fact, Roxxon has appeared in the background of many MCU properties, and Peggy Carter even paid them a visit on her TV show. There's a strong possibility that Christian Bale will be playing Roxxon's CEO Dario Agger in the upcoming Thor: Love and Thunder.
Ow!
The leader of the terrorist cell is named Raza, who in the comics is a member of the space supergroup the Starjammers, along with Skunk Lady, Space Possum, Cyclops' dad, and Jose Canseco. He also has scarring on his face, but on the opposite side. When Tony builds his suit, he repurposes his own missile designs. In his pitch to the military brass, he even name drops repulsor technology.
It's the first missile system to incorporate our proprietary repulsor technology.
During his escape, we get a glimpse of this terrorist played by Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine.
My turn.
won't do what you tell me!
Morello is actually a huge geek at heart. He's also cameoed in Star Trek and co-wrote the comic Orchid for Dark Horse, and he played guitar on the score of Iron Man 1 and 2. Jensen appeared in Tony Stark's first appearance way back in Tales of Suspense number 39. His daughter in the comics is currently a superhero who appears in the US Avengers. When Tony arrives back in the US, he immediately gets a cheeseburger. Now, according to Robert Downey Jr., this is because of his own personal experience. He told Empire magazine that Burger King helped him get off drugs in 2003. He was in his car, which was filled with drugs, eating Burger King, and the burger tasted so bad it made him reevaluate his whole life, and he dumped his drugs into the sea. Now, this is fitting because Tony eats a burger when he's sobering up from his bad behavior and seeking to humble himself and atone for his past sins. When Tony and Obadiah speak near the arc reactor, you can see canisters of palladium hexafluoride here. Now, this is the key element in the arc reactor that also poisons him in the sequel. This is also where Obadiah casually drops his supervillain name.
That's what we do. We're ironmongers. We make weapons.
In this scene, it looks like Obadiah was playing chess with himself. This is a nod to the Chessmen, a team of supervillains he led in the comics. Not to be confused with the Checkers, the J-pop 90s phenom band. Stain is even wearing a checkered robe. A little later, Obadiah plays a piece on the piano written by 18th century composer Antonio Salieri. Now, he was bitterly jealous of Amadeus Mozart, who never suspected that his older friend was also his rival, which mirrors Tony and Obadiah's relationship. He brings Tony some Ray's pizza from New York, and if you remember, Santa Claus warned us to pick the correct Ray's pizza way back in the Jon Favreau film Elf.
There are like 30 Ray's pizzas. They all claim to be the original, but the real one's on 11th.
Now, we actually theorized that Stain could have been a member of Hydra this entire time. We made a whole video about it. You should check it out if you have time. And while we're talking about Jeff Bridges, there are a couple of nods to his most famous role. When Pepper hacks into Obadiah's system, you can see the ship that he used to ship weapons to the terrorists was actually called Lebowski.
Nobody calls me Lebowski. You got the wrong guy. I'm the dude, man.
And this barcode reads, The Dude. And the ship's manifest included several Lebowski references, noting that you can't bring an amphibious rodent within city limits. It also mentions credence tapes, rugs that tie the room together, in the parlance of our times, and says that everything must abide by the league bylaws or the game will be forfeit. And if you've seen The Big Lebowski, then your mind is now blown. If you haven't, then you should watch it and then rewatch this video. It's a great movie. It uses a few too many curse words though.
What are you talking about?
Now, the other ship was named after Jules Verne, author of the novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So why do we care? Because that vessel was shipping submarine torpedoes. That's just a fun little nod for you Verniacs out there. Another vessel was called the Horvath, maybe a reference to Barton Horvath, the mid-century bodybuilder who often graced Iron Man magazine? Or I'm reaching. Tony's Mark I armor was made to mimic his original suit from the comics. And also, his Mark III suit was briefly yellow, like in the comics, before he added in the hot rod red. All the suits in this movie were actually designed by Iron Man comic artist Adi Granov. Jarvis says that he's going for the altitude record against the SR-71 Blackbird. Now, this jet was actually the inspiration for the X-Men's jet from the comics. Tony fails because of his suit's icing problem. But funny enough, this is the opposite problem of the actual Blackbird jet that would overheat and expand at high altitudes. And this little detail was noticed by the channel Canadian Lad. When Tony powers up his repulsor blast, you can actually see the energy travel from his arc reactor. And this next Easter egg is really hard to notice. The sound of Jarvis's heads-up display are actually made from old-school 8-bit video games. For instance, part of this sound originated from the sound of aliens dying in Space Invaders 2. And as we saw in Avengers, Tony has a fondness for old-school Atari.
That man is playing Galaga.
Tony is called to action when he hears that the 10 rings are causing trouble in Jensen's hometown.
To the outskirts of Gilmera.
I'm from a small town called Gomera.
In the background here, you can see a new prototype version of Captain America's shield. Favreau and his team were surprised that so many fans noticed this, so they gave the shield a larger purpose in the sequel. And at one point, Tony puts off speaking to his alma mater, MIT.
The MIT commencement speech
Is in June.
Now, of course, he would later fulfill the speaking engagement in Civil War, but also, MIT might be where he met Rhodey, because this is an MIT class ring. The climax of the film is adapted from Iron Man number 200, which also features an exploding reactor. However, in the comics, the fight ends with Stain committing suicide. Just before he reveals his secret identity at the press conference Mark II, Tony is reading a newspaper. Now, this picture of Iron Man is actually a screenshot from a video that some fans shot while hiding on the set. It's appropriate since this grainy photo looks like it was snapped by an amateur. During the closing credits, you can see the blueprints for the War Machine armor that will appear in the next film. And finally, Nick Fury's original cameo included references to several more Marvel heroes.
As if gamma accidents, radioactive bug bites, and assorted mutants weren't enough.
It's possible that Marvel Studios was trying to make deals with Fox and Sony to include the X-Men and Spider-Man, the way they'd already made a deal with Universal to include the Incredible Hulk in the MCU. This cameo was so secret that Samuel L. Jackson was driven to a closed set in a car with tinted windows, and he stepped out of the car dressed as Nick Fury. And Fury actually looked more like David Hasselhoff in the comics.
I'll get that vampire's blood if I have to suck it from her neck.
This version is modeled after the Ultimates alternate universe version of the character, which was modeled after Samuel L. Jackson. Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs we know about. If you found any, let me know in the comments below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.